I'd like to welcome everybody to our March speaker series. Welcome. My name is Ed Cunningham. I'm the president of the board of directors of the Tropical Forest and Botanical Garden. So welcome and happy St. Patrick's Day. I did bring my St. Patrick's Day frog. You can't see him, but there's my St. Patrick's Day frog for you all. So thank you very much for joining us today. Just a couple of housekeeping items. You can ask Sarah questions if you go to the chat button at the bottom of your screen. If you hit that, you can type in your questions, and by the end of the presentation, Sarah will be glad to answer any questions for you. Also, at the end of the seminar, there will be a survey pop up, and we really appreciate you filling out the survey. For us to get our grants that we depend on, we need to turn in a survey. Also, please tell your friends about this. Every month we have a speaker series. Right now with COVID, we're doing them via Zoom. They are being recorded, and if you go to our website, you will be able to link to the various speaker series programs we're doing this year. So thank you very much again for joining us. And I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Sarah Fangman. She is superintendent of the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. And Sarah was one of our speakers last year. And you may ask yourself, why is the garden sponsoring or having a speaker on the coral reef? Well, we feel the land and the sea are codependent on each other, and the health of one reflects on the health of the other. So we think it's very important to understand the health of the reef. Sarah came to the Reef National Sanctuary here in the summer of 2017, and she transferred from the Grace Reef National Marine Sanctuary in Georgia. She's a marine scientist. She's had many different positions, and Sarah is not afraid to get her hands wet and dirty. She's a certified diver with over 400 dives in the Keys. And with that, Ms. Sarah, I will turn it over to you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to address your audience on a subject of great importance to me, something I'm obviously very passionate about. But if it helps to strengthen the connection between why I'm here, I'm a huge fan of the garden. In fact, I took my dad, who is visiting from Minnesota, to the garden this weekend, and we had a lovely, lovely walk about the garden. So thank you for what you do. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today about a big thing that we're doing. And I think, again, there is connections because it's a bit of a gardening project out on the reef. So I'll launch right in, and it is what we refer to as Mission Iconic Reefs. So let's start by just acknowledging, and my slides are not advancing, so give me 1 second to resolve that. There we go. Okay. Let's just start by acknowledging that our reefs here in the Keys are really central to our economy. They are also really important to our way of life. And we depend upon them for recreation. They provide a lot of support to our tourism industry. We have very important fisheries occurring here in the Florida Keys. They are probably, for many of us, part of the reason why we live here is our beautiful marine environment. Now, I don't think it's probably going to be a surprise to any of you to hear me say that our reefs have been declining. They've been declining for decades, not unique to our reefs. Sadly, reefs all around the world have been suffering from a variety of threats, true here and elsewhere. Things like water quality issues, temperature stress, storm events, overfishing, anchor damage, lots of different things have been causing our reefs to really struggle in the last several decades. Oops, sorry, my slides are advancing slowly, so I hit it twice. So in addition to the decades of decline that we've been seeing that I just referenced, we are also seeing a really massive disease outbreak on our reefs, and it is called stony coral tissue loss disease. On this slide, you see images of several different species of coral that are affected by it. And you don't have to be a marine biologist to know that those corals don't really look right. So those are corals that are undergoing stress and frankly dying from this disease that we've been seeing. So this disease is really quite unusual, and that's due to a variety of factors. First of all, it is affecting a lot of species. About half of the hard coral species on the Florida Reef Tract are affected by that. That is quite unusual. Typically, diseases in the coral community affect one or two coral species at a time. It's very unusual that we've got almost half of the species that are being affected by this. It also moves very, very rapidly through the coral itself. So once the coral is affected, it can succumb very quickly. And then lastly, it can cause high rates of mortality. Again, other diseases often result in sickness and the coral struggles, but they don't necessarily die. In this case, stony coral tissue loss disease, for several of the species that it affects, it's basically a death sentence. So that is why this disease outbreak that we are seeing right now is so unusual. I'm going to show you a series of slides. They all look the same except for the red blot on it, because the red blot on this represents where the disease outbreak is occurring. So this slide shows the Florida Reef Tract, which goes through the Keys all the way up to Martin County. That's the northernmost place where reefs occur in Florida. And you can see on this slide, in 2014 was when we first spotted stony coral tissue loss disease. Now I'm going to scroll through these slides, and you will see as the date advances, that red blotch gets bigger. So that disease is spreading throughout the Florida Reef Tract. By 2016, it's nearly all the way to the northernmost extent and is starting to come down here into the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. In 2017, it's gone all the way up through the northernmost portions of reefs in Florida, and it continues to march its way down through the Keys. You can see it got to us in Key West in 2019. Last year, it had made it all the way through the Marquesas. Cross your fingers, knock on wood. We have not observed it out in the Tortugas yet, and I really sincerely hope it stays that way, but time will tell. Up until about 2018, this was just, so 2014 to 2018, this was a Florida problem. Sadly, though, what you can see on this slide is it has started to occur in other reefs in the Caribbean. You can see the different countries here and when stony coral tissue loss disease was first observed. Now, we have been doing a tremendous amount of work in response to this disease response, or in this disease event. And you can see this is some of the logo salad of the organizations that have been involved in the response to this. And this talk is about a different initiative. It is about Mission Iconic Reefs and Restoration, but suffice to say that there is a massive initiative that has been ongoing related to responding to this disease. And I don't have time to talk about that. There's more information on our website if you're interested, or certainly you can feel free to ask questions and I can speak to that. But I brought all of this up because it is really part of the context as to why we need a massive and ambitious restoration program. Not just because of decades of decline, but then add on top of that this assault on our reefs from stony coral tissue loss disease. And we are really in a position where we need to do something. So I suspect that most of you probably also know that restoration has been ongoing here in the Florida Keys. In fact, has been pioneered here in the Florida Keys. We are very, very fortunate to have practitioners here who have developed the techniques that have since been exported to elsewhere in the world. And it has truly been heroic work that has been done here to pioneer these techniques and get out in the water and outplant corals and try to help bring things back. Unfortunately, to date, that work just hasn't been able to keep up with the declines. And so as a consequence, it really became apparent that we need to do something to turn things around. We need to take steps that are bold, ambitious, and beyond anything that we have tried before. These resources are just too important, too critical. We cannot sit by and let the declines just continue. Now, I would imagine that there are at least a few of you that are asking yourselves, well, for heaven's sakes, if we still have temperature stress, if we still have stony coral tissue loss disease, we still have hurricanes, we still have water quality issues, how in the world can you expect that restoration makes sense? Aren't you just sort of throwing your money after a doomed effort? And that's a very appropriate question. Very, very good question if you're asking yourself that. My answer to you is a couple of things. Number one, we cannot afford to wait. We cannot afford to sit back and say, we got to fix climate issues, we got to fix water quality issues, we got to fix, in sequence. We have to do that, and we have to do restoration. We have to do restoration simultaneously to taking on all of those other challenges while doing restoration smartly. That word. Anyway, we want to do it in a way that makes sense. And there is a way to do that. First of all, I mentioned that about half of the species on our reef are susceptible to stony coral tissue loss disease. That means half of them are not. And as it just so happens, many of the species, the two predominant species that are used in restoration here, are not susceptible. So number one, we can use species that are not susceptible to the biggest issue that is on our reef right now, which is stony coral tissue loss disease. Secondly, the corals that are out there, many of them are the hardiest of the hardy. They have survived Hurricane Irma. They have survived water quality issues. They have survived stony coral tissue loss disease. So there is resilience in the community, in the genetic population, if you will, out on the reef. And so we need to use that, those resilient corals to do restoration. Okay, so again, right, that's kind of setting the stage. We have a really urgent need. And so we decided to launch Mission Iconic Reefs to attempt to turn things around on 7 key sites. So this map shows you where our 7 reef sites are, where we are going to focus restoration. As you can see, we selected sites going all the way from off Key West here, Eastern Dry Rocks, all the way through the Keys to Careysport Reef. A couple of reasons for that. First of all, we didn't want to put all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak, so that we would just work in one particular area, although in some ways it would be easier. Recognizing that big disturbance events like Hurricane Irma will certainly happen again, we wanted to make sure we were spreading out our work and therefore our risk. So if, for example, something calamitous happened at Sombrero Reef and we were doing only Sombrero Reef, we would be really in a world of trouble. So we've got all these different sites. Secondly, we wanted to pick a handful of places that were historically very diverse, complex, and successful reef systems. Recognizing too that there are reefs around these places, we were hoping that the work we could do could essentially seed the areas around it. So that was also why we sort of spread our effort. So I'm not going to get into a tremendous amount of detail about the nitty-gritty of this project, but I do want to give you a few bits and pieces about our strategy. So what you're looking at here is a map of Sombrero Reef, which is in the Middle Keys. The different colors on this slide represent different zones within that single reef. So as gardeners, you probably know not all areas in your garden are created equal. Some areas get more light, some areas, the soil is different. Same is true on a reef. And so we wanted to create zone maps that represent the different sort of sub-habitats within each reef. So we created a map like this for each of our Mission Iconic Reef sites. And the reason that's important is, as I said, what is naturally going to be found in a different part of your reef will vary depending upon the subhabitat. So for example, on this slide, you see in the shallow reef crest, there's only a few species that can really survive in the high wave energy area like that. Whereas in the Fore Reef Terrace on the other side of the slide, you can see we would expect that there would be a different population or community of corals growing there. And so by doing this level of really rigorous mapping and rigorous analysis of what we would expect to see in these different places, we could calculate and plan for, well, how much of each different species are we going to need to target and how much would we likely expect to see there. So you can see the different species listed and what we would expect or target in terms of the percentage of the area covered by that specific species. So this slide is a little busy, so bear with me here. So I just wanted to sort of share with you that this mission is not only about outplanting more corals. We're just going to outplant more corals, and that's our strategy. It's more than that. We're going to build on the work that's been done to date, but we're going to take it to the next level. And what I mean by that, and as an audience of, I imagine, gardeners, it's kind of like gardening. So I wouldn't imagine that you would go to a nursery and buy a new plant, take it home, dig a hole, drop it in, and walk away and never do anything in. Likewise, in the coral restoration universe, we don't want to do that either. So what we need to do is, before we outplant corals, we want to prepare the site. So in this case, that means removing things that have grown over what would have been otherwise fabulous coral habitat. But in the absence of corals, we have algae and we have other nuisance species that have grown in abundance, taking over some of these areas. So we need to go out and prepare the site. Then we do that second sort of bar is coral propagation and outplanting. So we actually grow the corals at nurseries, and then we bring them out and we secure them on the reef. But just like your garden, there are other organisms that live in the community that can make the survival of the plant, as it will, more successful. Bees, butterflies, I don't know. The same is true on a reef. So corals in a natural and healthy circumstance have neighbors, urchins, crabs. Those organisms are actually providing a service to the corals that help the corals succeed. They're eating the algae that might otherwise overrun the corals. And so we are going to be, in addition to outplanting corals, we are going to be helping this system to get back to a natural dynamic and bringing out some of those additional organisms. So in this case, it would be urchins and crabs. Now, again, in your garden, you don't just drop that plant in and walk away. You come back, you might pull some weeds, you might add some fertilizer, I don't know. Same is true, we're not gonna be adding fertilizer, but we will be going back to these sites on a regular basis. In the coral world, we sometimes have organisms, snails, that eat the corals. So, okay, we might need to remove the snails if they're eating our corals. And then we're going to continue to visit, monitor, do science, and adapt as we learn. Just like you do in your garden, you discover that, oops, that spot is really too much sun for this particular plant. I'm going to move that species over here where it's a little more shady, and I'm going to put something over there. So that's the kind of adaptive management, monitoring and adaptive management that will be a part of Mission Iconic Reefs. So thank you for getting through that long slide with me. Okay, so the other thing about this project is that it took us decades to get here in terms of decline. It's not going to turn around overnight. So this strategy is, as you can see, I hope you can read it, the top of the slide goes over at the very top to 2035. So about 15 years where we anticipate, starting where we are now, which is the gray, 2% coral cover. This is typically a metric we use to ascertain how healthy a coral area is. Imagine a football field. Imagine if under natural healthy circumstances, you would expect to see 50% of that football field would be covered with coral. Then coral cover would be 50% there. Well, in the Florida Keys, coral cover has historically been 25, maybe even up to 35% in some places. But right now at these Mission Iconic Reef sites, it's closer to 2%. And in some cases, that coral is so spread out and so that it can't successfully reproduce on its own. So we need to get that coral cover, that percent cover of the area available that they could live, much higher than that. So our target is to get to 25%. That said, we've identified different phases in this mission. We are currently in phase 1A, where we're focusing on the species that are not susceptible to stony coral tissue loss disease, the species that the practitioners are already very, very well practiced in outplanting and growing. Those are the acroporids or the staghorn and elkhorn corals. I'll show you some pictures of those right now. So I hope you can see my icon, my little mouse moving around, but what I'm showing you here is the Acropora cervicornis, that's the staghorn coral, and over here is the elkhorn coral. So those are the species that we're working with primarily in phase 1A, which is where we are now. Now, it's really exciting because in addition to just developing this strategy, we're also doing a lot of work, or the practitioners are, to develop techniques that are going to help us do more and do it faster. And so that's going to really help us be able to be successful with this ambitious mission. So for example, we're seeing already that some of the coral species that are being outplanted are successfully spawning. And again, that is absolutely what we need and want, because we don't want to be doing this forever. We're also, as I mentioned, we've got really resilient species out there, or survivors out there. And so we're going out and taking samples from them so that when we are taking into our nurseries to grow the corals that will then one day be outplanted, that we have a really robust, diverse, and resilient gene pool, so to speak. We don't want to be doing monoculture. As gardeners, I'm sure you understand the same thing is true. We don't want to have just one single species that's all genetically identical, because if something befalls that, everything is going to be susceptible. So we're doing a lot of work to make sure we have a really resilient gene pool. As I mentioned, typically the two species you see on this slide, the acroporids, are what people have been typically working with. We've got new species that practitioners are starting to develop techniques to grow and produce in nurseries so that they can be added to the mix, because we don't want our reefs to just have two species. That would not be a good idea. And then we're also working to develop outplanting techniques that will help us do things faster. One of the challenges that we've had, and the reason we haven't been able to keep up with the decline, is because many of the steps in this process are extraordinarily slow. So the outplanting process, taking little clippings from the nursery trees that are growing in special nursery areas, the practice is they clip off a little cutting from those corals in the nursery, they collect a basket of it, and you swim out to the reef and you glue them down. That's really slow. It takes a lot of work. And so what ways can we speed that up? So for example, working on growing them on a hemp rope. So instead of having to clip off each little nub that then gets individually glued onto the reef, you take that whole rope after it's grown to the size you want it, swim the whole thing on the reef, lay it down, the hemp will disappear, the corals will reattach, and it's much, much quicker. So things like that are going to help us be more productive in this. So site segmentation. So we are actively out there now beginning to do this work. Very, very exciting. I showed you a map previously of Sombrero. This is Eastern Dry Rocks. This is a separate sort of mapping exercise. So the last one was to characterize different zones and habitats. This is to distinguish where different practitioners work and what gets planted where. So what you see on here, and it's not important to see the details, but those boxes were set up so that we could say, okay, Moat, you work over here, Coral Restoration Foundation, you work over there, Reef Relief, you work over here, whatever. Well, actually, Reef Relief isn't doing this. I meant to say Reef Renewal. Reef Renewal is going to work there. So we've segmented the reefs so that we have a very organized and efficient way to do it. And we have begun removing those nuisance and invasive species to prepare these reefs to be outplanted on. So Eastern Dry Rocks is getting a tremendous amount of work and attention right now. That's off Key West here. If you're a boater, you may see some more mooring buoys associated with these sites. We are installing new moorings so that the practitioners will be able to access these places. They're obviously going to be going and doing a lot of work, but we also want people to be able to go and visit these places. We want folks to be able to see this work in progress and even help us with it. And so recognizing that this is a very ambitious, and it is going to take a lot of work, that stewardship element of this, going out and just looking at your garden and taking away any invasive species, removing the marine debris, for example, that's going to take a lot of work. And so we're developing a program to engage the community in this. And some of you may be familiar with our Blue Star program. This is a voluntary program that dive and snorkel operators can participate in, and they really take their operations to the next level. And so we're working to develop a program where they can bring their guests out to these places, show them, and then ultimately potentially even be able to have folks actively helping with the restoration. This is not just a science project. We are also really interested in making sure that it has community elements to it. And so we're working in partnership with the United Way of Collier and the Keys, and they are really taking the lead on developing some education initiatives that go with this so that our students can really become the next generation of coral restoration practitioners. We'll be working with them in the classroom. Also, they're looking into doing some scholarships. So I hope you'll be hearing more about that in time. And we're very, very excited that we can do that. So clearly this is going to take considerable investments. And this slide here, and there's a lot of stuff on it, but is an example of NOAA. I work for NOAA. NOAA investments in this mission from last year, just 2020. You can see the numbers listed on the far left, the far left of the slide. The next column lists what those funds went to support. The third column represents, and the bullets are who those funds went to. And then I'm really pleased because this is not just a Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary effort. NOAA is a very, very large organization. It has a lot of capacity. And so I am thrilled that we have been able to tap into a lot of different organizations within NOAA and bring their skills and resources into this effort. So this far right column lists the different parts of NOAA that are actively participating, providing expertise and funding to support Mission Iconic Reefs. Now, of course, this is not just NOAA. By no means is this just NOAA. It couldn't be possible without our incredible partners. So I want to show you a slide that these are kind of the core partners that have gotten this off the ground. We continue to get more people interested in supporting it. And so I am sure as time goes on that there will be more logos on this logo salad. But these are really the folks that are making this mission possible. And we're enormously grateful to all of them for their participation. So as I mentioned, you know, this is something that we all depend upon. Our reef system is critical to our way of life. And we definitely need to do something to turn things around. But our intention is not to just, you know, create sort of this museum, this beautiful garden that nobody can visit. We really want this to be a place that supports our community in many, many ways. The place that people can visit, can be inspired by, can enjoy, can help us do the restoration work. You can see on this slide some of the statistics about the size of this restoration. As I noted, I think I said this is the biggest restoration project ever attempted in the world. So it is really quite significant. And so we're really, really hoping that this is going to serve the community. Now, I didn't want to finish my talk about Mission Iconic Reefs and leave you potentially with the impression that all we need to do for our corals is just outplant more corals and monitor them carefully. I think that this absolutely needs to be a part of a larger strategy. We need to do everything we can to help these corals and these ecosystems. And so, because I really believe that, you know, the problems that we're facing, climate change and, you know, massive storm events and water quality issues, they are really significant and challenging. But I think that if we take every possible local step that we can, we will make a difference. And so on this slide, you do see some images, marine debris cleanups, you know, our mooring buoy system. You know, we've got hundreds and hundreds of moorings out there that if you could imagine in the last 30 years that those weren't there. And instead of pulling up and tying your boat up to a mooring, everybody had been dropping their anchor. Imagine what our seafloor would look like. So things like that. Education, educating snorkelers before they go in the water. Research has shown that if we give somebody just a little bit of information, it actually results in half the level of contact and impact on our reefs. Our boater education course, our outreach events, all of these are things that we're trying to do in addition to restoration. So we're not just going to go out and outplant our way out of this problem on our reefs. We're going to do as much as we can. And that was kind of the thinking behind the last time I was able to speak with this audience, it was about our restoration blueprint. That is the intention of that effort. And I hope that many of you are aware we've been doing this for quite some time. developing a strategy looking forward to not just do restoration again, but are there different regulations we need to put in place? Are there zones we need to put in place? And so that management plan review process that we refer to as the restoration blueprint is our attempt to do that. And so I just wanted to put in a plug, since I have your attention, to keep your eye out for the next step of the restoration blueprint, because we will be releasing what we call a draft rule. For those of you that are familiar and do remember, the last public comment was on 4 potential alternatives. And we heard from the community, listened to the ideas of the community on what we put out, said, okay, here's what we have to suggest. What do you think? What you will see in this draft rule is a response to what we heard from the community. So it is going to be a single proposal instead of 4. It will have the same elements. So it will still have a management plan, which speaks to what the staff do on a day-to-day basis. It will propose a single boundary that we are proposing to address the issues we're concerned about. It will have sanctuary-wide regulation changes proposed, and then zones. As many of you know, we have lots of different zones in the Florida Keys, and so we've got some updates to those that are proposed. And so we're going to release that hopefully later this summer, and we will be once again asking for public comment. Before something like that becomes final, we put it back out to take the public's input. And I really feel confident that people will recognize that between the version that we put out in August of 2019 and what we put out this year, they will see that the community's voice has been heard in what we are proposing. Okay. So just my last slide here, our intent, you know, many of these places that we're working on, and the reason we called this Mission Iconic Reefs is these reefs were historically iconic and really known throughout the world as really vibrant and rich places. And sadly, over the last several decades, they have declined to the point where, sadly, they've become somewhat of poster children for coral reef decline. And so our hope is to turn that back around. And with this effort, make these spots, once again, some of the world's most iconic reefs. So I really, really appreciate people's interest in tuning in and listening to my comments on all of this. And if there are questions at this point, I would be more than happy to take them.
Sarah, we do have, again, if the participants would go to the chat mode at the bottom of their screen and type in a note or a question for Sarah, that would be great, and she can answer those questions. There is one question, Sarah, that with Hurricane Irma and other storms, are you pretty much still on schedule from your timeline, or you're falling behind?
That's a great question. Well, actually, we launched Mission Iconic Reefs after Hurricane Irma. Hurricane Irma and the stony coral tissue loss disease really kind of tipped things over the edge in terms of recognizing that, oh my goodness, what we're doing is not enough, and we need to do something really, really significant to address that. And so Hurricane Irma actually precedes this particular mission. But that said, this mission is, because we are really stepping up the volume of restoration that's happening, the practitioners, so specifically, I mean, Coral Restoration Foundation, Moat Marine Lab, and Reef Renewal right now are the primary participants. They have been expanding their nurseries. So Hurricane Irma did affect some of the nurseries pretty significantly in these restoration practitioners. This mission, because it is going to be spread out and there will be more, we hope that our vulnerability to future storms, because heaven knows there will be another storm and then another storm and another storm. And so by spreading out and expanding our infrastructure, we hope to be able to be better equipped to rebound from that. We cannot avoid the impacts of storms. They will happen. That is part of these reefs have evolved under hurricanes. That's a normal thing. And they're fine if the coral cover is at that 25% level. If we had 25% coral cover, those reefs would be able to recover. And in some cases, some of these species, they depend upon storm events. Actually, they asexually reproduce. They break off, and then a piece gets blown with the currents down the reef, and that little piece secures to the reef and grows, and boom, you have more coral growing. So hurricanes are not in themselves a bad thing, but they're a really hard thing if your coral cover is down at 2%. So I hope I answered that question.
Yeah. One other question. With the when did you say the draft report would be coming out this year?
I don't have an exact date yet, Ed. I wish I did. That's dependent upon a lot of steps that we're working our way through between now and then. But our target is to get it out this summer. And then we'll try to do public comments again. Of course, pandemic makes everything like that challenging, whether we can gather again like we did the last time and take people's oral comment, or if we have to do it like this online, I'm not sure, but we will absolutely be providing opportunity for people to give their comments, have their voices heard, and I really, really encourage people to do that.
Very good. Well, Sarah, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. And again, for participants, if you'd like to see this, it will be linked through our website, and it's recorded and will be posted. So tell your friends and family to check it out. It's extremely interesting and critical for us here in the Keys. So again, Sarah, I thank you very much, and come back to the garden anytime.
Oh, I will. I love it.
Alrighty. Thank you much.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Appreciate your interest. Bye.